Oh, there we go. Right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I really hope this is worth the wait in terms of, I feel that doing this now, it's probably a bit disorientating. I was only going to do a little bit to follow on from Marwa's presentations. So just to get me back on track and hopefully all of us, oops, what's happened here? This is part 2.
Are your slides not moving when you want them to?
No, that's fine. This is a different one. So this is part 2 of the presentation of the law, technology and legal education in Egypt. Part 1 being what Dr. Marwa actually talked about this morning, which was on the dramatic transformation of how law is practiced, interpreted and taught in Egypt, and how technology, digital literacy, AI is embedded in any sort of modernized curriculum for the future of law teaching. In Egypt, we have something which is called the Egyptian Vision 2030, and one of those things sort of mandates some of the areas that we should actually be looking at, which includes skills education. So some of the challenges that we talked about yesterday in some detail were the elements of new entrants in the profession being digital natives and actually having more advanced skills than perhaps some of their seniors. And so, you know, we talk in higher education about co-partnership and co-design, but I think in the world of work, we also have those challenges there of a sort of slightly topsy-turvy world. So my contribution to this presentation is really very simple, and I'm very humbled, having just listened to the presentation before. And mine is just a very simple, practical example of what in the older days used to be called e-portfolios. And I will only talk for 10 minutes max, you can be reassured. And Andy will give me one of his stares if I exceed that time. So just by way of context, my name's Bethan O'Neill. I completed my career as originally an academic in law, moving to business and management, then as so many of us do, to academic management. And then I zigzagged to go into executive administration, finishing my UK career as a registrar and university secretary and clerk to the board of governors. And then I thought I'd retired, and just serendipity happened to mean that I ended up in Egypt via Mauritius. And, you know, one of my calls to fame in Mauritius was that I had the privilege of helping to wind up a university, be quality assurance enhancement manager, teach law and management subjects. So I have an interest in terms of AI and technology, wearing many different hats. So what has sparked my interest at the moment, and this again Andy referenced yesterday, was that in January this year there was a GISC report on trends and assessment in higher education, considerations for policy and practice. And one of the things throughout my career has been this idea of really wanting to go forward in the future to embrace innovation and change. And obviously, digitalization, the digital literacy, digital curriculums, etc., adopting technologies to enhance assessment is very much part of that. And as I say, the other side of my interest is sort of some quality and assurance mechanisms as well. But in terms of pedagogically and the future of law teaching, I'm really, really interested in this idea of listening to the student voice and co-partnership, and especially in the fact that I can see how adept and capable many students are. What I'm going to talk about is, as I say, the student portfolio, digital journalism, digital journaling. And this is because we've recently had a new revalidation where we wrote into the curriculum that this would be really useful to do. So whilst it's sort of, I feel it's old hat in some ways, certainly 80s, 90s, you know, Sean Gibbs and all of that. Very important as a learning tool. And then recently, I think I can see that many professional bodies are actually still reigniting their interest in this. And you know, in terms of our research for doing this, I've been particularly interested in some of the work done by the Law Society in Canada, particularly in Ontario, that has a really strong website and makes a compelling argument for why reflective practice is important. So really, I'm not going to spend long on this, just to say, you know, it's probably old hat to all of you, that really when we're talking about the Student Portfolio Digital Journal, it's about students keeping a diary and keeping a diary using modern technologies that are available to them. And in our circumstance, it really is about capitalizing and exploiting the advantages of Microsoft Teams and OneNote. So just in terms of a couple of contextual considerations, again, this diagram on the left, I think, came up yesterday. And really, that's what it is all about encouraging students to reflect on their own practice, to actually say, when students come to me, many of them queuing up to say, you know, can you tell me this? Can you tell me that? And I try and reassure them that Bethan O'Neill is not a chat bot. You know, I now have this extra thing where I actually can use this as a tool, not to avoid my responsibilities, but to say back to them, well, what do you think? Why is it that you're finding things difficult, etc.? What do you feel about things? What was good or bad about your experience? What don't you understand? Why don't you do a bit of thinking and analysis about it and really think hard about what you could have done? So in terms of contextual considerations for us at the BA Honours Anglo-Egyptian degree in Cairo, in the British University, essentially it's a 4-year degree. That is because the Supreme Council of Universities in Egypt say that law degrees have to be 4 years, and how this aligns with the UK is that we have what we call prep year, and then it's prep year plus 3, and then the 3 years validated by London South Bank University. And one of the things that we are very clear about, and particularly for Egyptian students, is the transition from school to higher education and the move towards independent learning. So learning to learn in higher education is important. Preparation for the workplace in terms of employability is important. And also in our revalidated degree, we had a number of cross-cutting themes. So long gone are the days where, you know, basically it was just lectures, go into a lecture, you teach a subject, you get your assessment, and that is it. At least that's what I like to think. And what we do in the British University in Egypt is we actually offer an incredibly rich menu of activities, which covers mooting, simulations where students can attend, internships, guest speakers, masterclasses, you know, the usual platter, if you like, of things that could be available. But what is difficult is, in terms of inclusivity, is that, you know, sometimes just the brightest and the best get to do those things. And it's important that it should be a level playing field and be available to all. So one of the things that we have done is we've used this device called the Student Portfolio Digital Journal to try and level up the playing field. So very briefly here, these answering, you know, some of the 3 questions: why digital journaling? What is the student portfolio and why was it introduced? It's essentially a change project. It's going to touch each and every one of our students. In law, we started it this year, so there's 128 students that are registered with Microsoft Teams and have their own individual OneNote account. And by the end of 4 years, we will have 500 plus students. And the green shoots actually are showing us that the very, very best students are doing absolutely wonderful work. But, you know, there are some standard examples, but there are also some challenges with those who just don't get it as yet. But we've got plenty of time. We realise that it is an incremental process. So what I just want to do, again, by way of contextualisation, is to say that in Egypt, we certainly know how to work our students hard. Okay, so whereas in the UK, you would have a much less reduced number of modules. In Egypt, this is taken from our validation document. In semester 1, you'll see that students do 6 10-credit modules. In semester 2, they do another 6. That's 12 modules per year. And in terms of assessment, there's coursework and there's exams, which of course is great if we go back to the HE Trends documentation, which is really saying, okay, for institutions that have moved totally to coursework, there are real difficulties posed with AI and ChatGPT, in that some students still think, I produce the content, I need to get a top grade. Whereas I'm very clear in my lectures when I talk, I'm an associate professor in common law, but in coursework, I don't really give marks for content because it's available to you at the click of a button. It's what you do with it that is important. So, you know, 12 modules a year. Either side, you have what we call the twin pillars. And this is really what the portfolio is aiming to exploit and capitalize on it. The idea of learning to learning higher education, the fact that we want to listen to the student voice, we want to have students engaged, and at the same time, we want to produce, we want to give them the opportunity for them to own and produce their own portfolio. We stress that it's theirs. We obviously have to give a significant amount of input at the beginning in prep. And the idea is that by the time we get through to degree year 3, which is in fact year 4, students will be taking total responsibility for it. One of our biggest challenges is the issue of assessment. Sorry, I'm just going here. Is the issue of assessment, okay? And again, yesterday, what was talked about in some of the presentations was the potential for interdisciplinarity. And in the British University, we have worked closely with the Faculty of Law, who are a couple of years ahead of us, in as much as they are graduating their first cohort this year, where there has been a requirement for students to produce their portfolio. The Faculty of Art and Design had a different model from us. So you'll see on the left here, I've got those 2 little phrases. Ours is an umbrella, which is what the Faculty of Law wanted the student portfolio for. And ours is a rainbow, which is art and design. And so art and design actually mandates every module to do a little bit on every module leader has to have some assessment and a component where students have to complete something in their components, in their digital journal. We haven't done that. We have taken a much more laid back approach, but at the same time, quite a strict approach. And we're wanting it to actually reflect what is necessary for professionalism. So we are giving students a choice in terms of every semester. They have to reflect on 5 pieces of work. At the very beginning, when you're introducing this, as I'm sure anybody who might have engaged in this before will know, you have to invest an awful lot of time. You have to make sure that your rubric, that you're very clear for students and indeed for staff as well to bring these things on board. And you need to do a lot of training and development to make sure that everyone knows why they are doing this. It's also very important to resist the easy way out, which is to make it like another module. And students particularly are often saying, well, what do I have to do to get a pass? What do I have to do to do really well? And it's about trying to get this message over to them that this is their portfolio. It is a pass-fail requirement that is assessed at the end of level 3. Okay, and in Egypt, we often use the graduate requirement to encompass or embrace training opportunities as opposed to strict, academic work where you have the modules and the credits. And what we've done is we've actually thematically said that over the 4 years, starting with prep up here, there's this idea of beginning and exploring, i.e. you are now a student at the British University in Egypt. We have different expectations for you. This is about your transition to learning. You're not, at school where you just ask your teacher this, that, and the other. It's about you taking responsibility for your learning. And I often say to the students, my aim for you is that one day, in 4 years' time, you'll look back and you will laugh at your efforts at the beginning now of the student journal, because some of them are being taken screaming and kicking to it. Others of them just take to it like a duck to water, and it's really, really rewarding. The byproducts are that you have again a rich repository of information that can be used for all kinds of things in terms of auditing information and stuff that we actually have. And as I say, again, I said to the students, one day I hope it will be like just getting up in the morning and brushing your teeth. But some of them don't feel like that at the moment. So I've said there's a range of activity, pass, fail. How do we govern ourselves? That it's really important in terms of lessons learned, in terms of the clarity and the guidance for both students and staff. Important is for staff, it's about this culture shift. And particularly in Egypt, I've noticed that there's a lot, it happens everywhere, it happens in the UK too. When I was a director of Learning Enhancement Access and Partnership at a large UK university, again, we had a big teaching and learning project on actually stopping working in silos. And my aim here is to use the student portfolio to make that shift from silos to shared spaces. But self-managing teams, again, it's quite a relatively new model in Egypt. And particularly because I think in Egypt, and Marwa, forgive me for this if I say it, but the individual is almost, well, I say preferred. You're taught as an individual to excel. And so the idea of the team, the idea of being selfless, being transparent, honest, actually not necessarily take everything as a credit to you, but to actually take it to the credits for a team is something which is a little bit counterintuitive. I don't mean to be derogatory too much in that sense, but I do feel that it is something a little bit new. As I say, I'm not going to take much more time other than saying the Faculty of Art and Design has been wonderful because they're 3 years ahead of us. And there are many lessons to be learnt. You wouldn't think that perhaps law and art and design have a lot in common, but they do. And so, for example, one of the things that we are doing now at the end of our first year in law is that we are making a student-led video on it so that they can actually help educate and bring on the next students next year. I'm going to finally, because I don't want to take up too much time, just to say this is our SWOT analysis at the end of it. That, basically the strengths, I think, speak for themselves. The whole thing about portfolio is it's about development, it's about reflection, it's about growth, it's about students taking responsibility, independent learning. Very clear, we're absolutely very clear that it is about student ownership. So the student is in charge of their portfolio, okay? They can, if you like, not be awarded their degree at the end of degree year 3, if they actually fail to produce a portfolio. And there's such a temptation, especially when you're doing as much work, 48 modules over 4 years, for students just to see this as a tick box thing. At least that's what we're trying to avoid. And again, early feedback suggests that we're winning on balance, but there's an awful long way to go still. So we're trying to create exposure to this idea of continuing professional development, creativity, reflection. The main object, as I've said, why we say in law it's an umbrella, is because we have this rich range of activity. We have mootings, we have students who excel in international mooting competitions, we have clinical legal practice, but we wanted to ensure the parity of making sure that it's evened out throughout to everyone. We have internships, all of which are valuable, but students sometimes can't make sense of, well, what mark do I get for this, or whatever. So obviously it's much easier in many ways if there is credit actually given to something. I'm not going to go through all of these. I've put some statistics down there. In terms of technology, one of the things that I find is an advantage is that well-rounded opportunity that something like OneNote gives, in terms of there can be emotional check-ins, that you can say, how are you feeling today? Okay, again, we've got some students who reply, not a lot yet, but our aim is to try and get more people just regularly engaging with us and feeling that there is that basis of trust and relationship, of trust and a relationship, so that they can be honest with us. Weaknesses, big weaknesses, motivations, ongoing incentivization, time intensity at the beginning, some of those things that I've actually mentioned. One biggie, as far as I'm concerned, is in terms of the assessment, is the element of subjectivity in terms of marking assessment work. What I actually think is a good assessment, somebody else, and particularly in a different cultural context, can be a subject of debate. So there's some weaknesses there. The opportunities, again, I think are very real, and particularly relates to, if you have a moment to look at this later, or if it's any use to you, some of our cross-cutting themes, when we're talking about skills development, research, sustainability, entrepreneurial activity, just to name a few. One of my big things that I'm aware of is what I call digital fatigue. This idea of a well-being issue and the mandatory nature of it. So I could spend a lot of time on this, but I realise we've had a really valuable but intense conference. And so I'm going to wrap up there, but I hope it's just useful to you as a model. And I would be more than interested if anyone, I've not put my name up there, but I'm bethan.o'neill@bue.edu. We are very much beginning a journey, and I would be really useful. It'd be really useful to me, to people who've talked about reflection, by the by, in terms of over the past 2 days, if they could get in touch or give me any feedback. Thank you very much to all of you.